Welcome back. Let's get you some updates. Both sessions of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet concluded a short while ago. A bulk of issues were addressed. Broadly, a consensus was built. Remember, the Prime Minister set the stage of the G20 meetings today by really putting out the statement that multilateralism is in crisis today. There was one sticking point, which was Ukraine, of course, which is why there's not going to be any joint communication from the foreign ministers of these countries regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has lashed out at the West for stalling negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Bilateral meets were also on the agenda. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar held bilateral talks with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, focusing on bilateral ties and pressing global issues, including the Ukraine conflict. Jaishankar also met, importantly, China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang, who's on his first trip to India. The India-China meeting holds immense significance in the wake of the continuing military standoff between the two sides in Ladakh at the line of actual control. The discussions were focused on addressing these current challenges to the bilateral relationship. On the other hand, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is also in India for the 8th edition of the Raisina Dialogues. She hailed Prime Minister Narendra Modi, saying that he's one of the most loved leaders globally. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to inaugurate India's flagship event of geopolitics in just a bit. But before that, some statements by the foreign ministers.
We spent, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes talking to each other. And the bulk of our conversation, understandably, was about the current state of our relationship. There are real problems in that relationship that need to be looked at, that need to be discussed very openly and candidly between us.
We can see that the West is continuing with other ways under new conditions. They are still promoting their interests without considering the interests of the vast majority of other stakeholders of the global community, and the developing countries can see it for what it is. I have already touched upon this matter, the colossal, boorish moral pressure. Yes, some of them, when such pressure is exerted against them, they are saying certain things, or they're voting in certain manner to relieve themselves a little bit from the pressure from the United States and their allies.
I want to go across first to my colleague Siddhant, who's been tracking developments from the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan. Siddhant, importantly, India-China foreign ministers talk. This is extremely important in the climate that it is coming. Tell us more of what has come out from that meeting.
Well, yes, the bilateral talks between the foreign ministers of two nations did take place on the sidelines of G20 summit, and perhaps one of the most important meeting which happened on the sidelines of G20, reason being that both the foreign ministers met for a longer time, and in fact the border issue was raised during the meeting, and that was also officially conveyed to the press, that the border issue was raised. At the same time, several issues related to G20 were raised in the meeting. So India has again made its stand clear, irrespective of what Chinese have to say on the bilateral relations between the two nations. India has made its stand clear that if they want any solution to the recent escalation in relationship, then for that they need to first discuss the border issue. And this is perhaps the reason that even today, when the photograph of the two ministers were put out on Twitter, then in the caption it was clearly written that border issues was discussed. So sending out a clear message to China from New Delhi that border issue is a priority for India. Whereas China believes that if India wants a solution to the recent escalation, then they should give away the geopolitical confrontation and should address other important issues. So this has been China's stand.
These are live visuals that are now coming in from the Raisina Dialogues happening from today for the next couple of days. The Prime Minister has arrived. He's expected to inaugurate and speak. Already in the morning, the Prime Minister has made a very important statement as far as the current global climate is concerned at the start of the G20 summit, which India is hosting. And his message has been very clear that, the world needs to do more. Post the World War II, countries came together so that they don't see conflicts anymore. But we live in a very conflicted world today. Also, multilateralism has come under question. That's the Prime Minister
of India,
in company with the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. We'll keep an eye on those visuals. We'll go across to the Prime Minister when he's speaking. But let me also bring in the guest who's joining us, Foreign Affairs expert. Okay, all right.
A very, very warm welcome to the Raisina Dialogue. This edition of the dialogue is special. It is the first dialogue in India's Amrit Kal, or Golden Age, an epoch marking the 25 years leading up to a century of India's independence, when colonial rule left our country starving of resources. It could not shackle the hopes and dreams of 1 billion people. Today, those aspirations remain alive, and 75 years that passed have led to this very moment of resurgence.
All right. We'll just go across to the Raisina dialogues as the Prime Minister begins his speech. Rabindranath Sachdev, Foreign Affairs expert, is also joining us on the show. How crucial do you see what is turning out to be a standoff of sorts when it comes to the Ukraine issue? Russia, possibly China on one side and the rest of the global world on the other side. And then, India is hosting this summit in this climate. There's been friction in the past, even in the present meeting. Is there any danger that Ukraine may completely derail the G20, other issues and summit-related concerns?
Thank you so much. Yeah, if not a danger, Ukraine will play the role of a catalyst. I think, see, where the world of today is, as Prime Minister has said, there's a global breakdown happening. That reality has to seep into everyone. And this is being precipitated definitely by the Ukraine crisis. Minus the Ukraine crisis also, already the world was shifting and moving away. The Euro-Atlantic Center and their regime and their worldview was, see, the center of gravity of the world about 80 years ago was different. The center of gravity of the world now is much more distributed across the world. That reality has to set in. And multilateral organizations, especially the UN, have really failed to prevent conflicts the world over.
Yeah.
So
the PM has been very categorically very critical of the UN in the past, even in his speech at the UNGA. And now today on multilateralism, what do you think is his key point is? Because I think the Indian message has been for quite a while that you need to divide decision-making properly amongst countries like India. And it cannot be a cohort of some.
Oh, absolutely so. But you see, the unfortunate thing is there can never be a reform of the UN. I don't think the UNSC can ever be reformed. Nobody will give up their veto and nobody will want other people into the tent. What could be done, should be done, maybe be done, is to create another organization, a tribunal focused on preventing conflicts all over the world. That could be something which could become, see, right now, we are in a way, like a critical mass in physics or a tipping point. The world is at that tipping point. At this tipping point, it is good that, we are not able to issue the joint communique. Let the differences come up. Why sweep them under? What's been happening so far? Any differences in all papered over in diplomatic wordsmithery. The reality of the world is that the challenges which are there, the pains which different nations are facing are or cannot be papered over. They're real challenges.
And in fact, I was going to ask you exactly this. What do you make of the Russian response after the finance ministers meeting also and during the external affairs ministers meetings also? Russia has been very categorical that the Western powers are abusing this platform to corner it.
No, certainly. Russia is categorical. Russia is saying it and the Western powers are doing it. There's no doubt to it, right? But Russia made the mistake that it invaded. It picked up the weapon the first time, right? The first shot which was fired was by Russia. That's Russia's mistake and what's going on. But the build up to it, to create the conditions which kind of, I would not say compelled, but due to which Russia thought it needed to pick up the weapon, are or were created by the US and NATO without doubt. Big picture.
Yeah.
Now, Russia is saying it clearly. There is China, there is India. So the world is getting much more distributed in terms of the power centers. And what is happening is the US, by the way, Europe has gotten even more stronger due to the Ukraine war, more solidified. Us, we, our European values, you would hear the rhetoric coming often, right? Now, the US aims to be the solo superpower, which could be fine, and it wants to prevent China. Now, we have our own issues with China also.
Yeah.
So there's a, kind of a alignment to our interests. But if you look at the bigger global picture, in this global picture, there is no other way, and nobody is ready to live and let live.
Can I ask you,
that is the paradigm
in such a climate, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, so much pressure was mounted on India in the initial months. It has continued in some form or the other. India had stood fast as far as its outlook is concerned. No compromise on its own national interest. Rest, of course, India stands for peace. That has been the message. But India is also not very willing to take any additional burden of the conflict on it, because we frankly have nothing to do with it. We have got our relationships with Russia. We're not going to throw them into the, into the gutter because of this. Overall, do you think India has managed this extremely well? And even the Western powers are beginning to realize that best they can hope for is that India mediates. India is not going to give an inch as far as its own interests are concerned.
Very interesting question. I would say that, when the war started, it was the first thing. It was something happening for the first time with everyone, right? Even with India, we were a new dynamic out there. So the first few months, we were wanting to stay on the sidelines, not get involved in anything. We wanted to wish it away, right? But yes, we did face pressure from the West and the US. And yes, we did, in fact, hold 3 contracts to to Russia under American pressure in August of last year, or I think March, April. State Department official testified to the US Congress. The congressman asked, India is our friend, but why is it siding or abstaining in the UN votes? This State Department official, Donald Lu, the famous Donald Lu, right? He said, we understand India's legacy and relations and all, but India is coming around. They paused one order for MiG aircrafts upgrades, 2.1 billion, which is still pending, by the way. They paused an order on helicopters, and there was one more. So these were 3 orders which we put on pause. But later on, I think we fine-tuned our stance, and we got our logic very nicely, very correctly, which Minister Jaishankar started, articulating in the world forums that, you cannot be looking at the world only through the European lens. I mean, our problems are also there. It's not only your problems. You're not the center of the world, right? And then when Prime Minister in Samarkand with Putin said, the words that this is not an era of war,
right.
I think India's diplomacy and our stance evolved, matured, and now the West is realizing, yes, that, and the US, that India will tread its own path. But no matter that, behind the curtains, we are facing questions. We are being pressed to take or to downgrade our relations with Russia. So there's no doubt on that. And of course, we'll also have to look long term. You see, very selfishly, in a way speaking, Russia has been a great friend. But if you see Russia's performance, the performance of the military industry has been disappointing, to say the least, perhaps, right?
Okay.
For
Can I ask you a broad overall question? I must add a caveat that all of this power and the stance and the, backbone that India is showing also comes from the fact that it is possibly the only bright spot as far as global economy is concerned. And it is using that heft. Ultimately, diplomatic heft comes from economic heft. So we must focus on that. But overall, the world is looking with more respect, especially at the time when India is heading the G20 and hosting the presidency. Do you think that the outlook towards India from some of the traditional global powers has indeed fundamentally shifted?
Oh, yes, I do think so. And you're absolutely, absolutely right. It's our economic heft, it's our people, what we have in India as such, and our trajectory which is going. And also remember, India is not so much an export-driven totally economy like China was.
Yeah.
China grew fantastic, but it was all export-driven. India is very much a domestic market economy also. So that rise of India is absolutely, I mean, if we were a Paraguay or a Uruguay or a, small nation, no matter what our ancient legacy, no matter
yeah,
how
people wouldn't care.
smart analysis
That's the reality as far as diplomacy is concerned. Rabindranath, I request you to stay with me. I want to go across to my colleague Abhishek Jha, who's also tracking more of what has happened as far as the G20 front is concerned and what's expected, for example, from the Raisina dialogue. Everybody very keenly waiting for the Prime Minister's speech, especially after the stage that he has set, Abhishek, in the morning, saying that multilateralism is in crisis. The world needs to wake up and look at the challenges it's facing. Give us a sense of how the day was at the G20 today. What were the highlights?
So clearly, the day started with Prime Minister's message that the world is at a crossroads where multilateral organizations, especially United Nations, has been failing time and again. He counted the recent developments or recent crises that the world has seen: pandemic, climate change, Russia-Ukraine war, food crisis, fuel crisis, and these are the fundamental aspects of the world. Where the United Nations was mandated to deal with them and to keep them under control. But clearly, United Nations has not been able to deal with this crisis. So there should be a representation from other countries or other members of United Nations in a big way, where they can reflect the reality of the changing times. We know that India at the time of formation of United Nations was not on a very good space, but now India is the fourth or fifth largest economy. It has world's largest population. The strategic importance of India being in Asia is very important. It is world's largest market, where every investing country is eyeing a good share. So clearly, a country like India should get a more prominence at United Nations and other multilateral organizations. So that was a sense that Prime Minister tried to convey to the state members.
Abhishek, I request you to just stay with me. Let me take a final comment from Rabindranath Sachdev as well. Overall, what would India and the global community hope to achieve from these G20 meetings today? At least a bare minimum that you think should happen.
I think what we should hope to achieve is, something which we have in this thing, Manthan. And, after that Manthan, the essence which comes out, the raw essence of the reality, of the new reality of the world, I think should come out. It would hit everybody in the sense that, they would realize that the world has changed, there are new dynamics, and the world has to shift gears. I think that's going to be the clear-cut message takeaway from these 2 days also. And going up to the G20 leaders meeting, there could be some things, etc., because this realization has come up now. It's precipitating. The world cannot go on like this. The world organizations in charge of, or so to say, for preventing conflict and all, are absolutely, toothless. So why not maybe let the UN be, UNSC be, why not create a separate tribunal commission or something which looks and which is having a partnership or a composition of all the new reality of this world.
Okay.
So that some challenges can be addressed. Otherwise, all of these nations are walking their own music to their own drums, and we are heading for conflicts and conflicts and conflicts.
Okay. The Italian Prime Minister is speaking. Let's listen in.
Inaugurate this year's Raisina Dialogue, and to do so in front of such an extraordinary audience, an audience that includes representatives from across the G20, with whom Italy shares a special responsibility to find solutions to our common global challenges. With this in mind, well, I would like to take this opportunity to share my appreciation for Prime Minister Modi's hard work on handling a complex presidency, and to reiterate Italy's full support to its success. I am told that the name of this international conference comes from Raisina Hill here in Delhi, from which the government is granted a broader view of India's capital city. In troubled times like today, this is, I think, a fitting metaphor of the vision that we as leaders, thinkers, civil servants need to adopt. It reminds me of the Palatino, the Campidoglio, and the other hills on which our ancestors founded ancient Rome more than 2,000 years ago, from which an extensive network of roads connected different provinces, leading from the center of the Italian peninsula to very diverse cultures. And I think that it is also the way we need of doing politics today. When I was running for the electoral campaign, I said that I didn't want to climb the institutions to gain power. I wanted to climb the institution, for it is the only way that you can have a better view of what is happening and give best solutions.